right, I guess we're ready to get started. I do not have any PDF of the Android book. I do not have, I talked about the other PDF for the other class, and we'll hit on that one a little bit later. So, all right, again, I don't think it really pays to go over any of this stuff. You've heard it all before. This, as always, is taken pretty much right out of the, out of Banner. All right. The book, if you haven't seen it, probably you have, but if for some reason you haven't, looks like this. Now, do they have copies of this in the bookstore? Okay. What you don't know, and what I'll talk about next class, just so you see it, guess what else they have? Not in the bookstore, but what else is out there? That is their Swift version of this book that I got sent over the break. So that's another thing that we can do if you want to. I can pass that around a little bit later, but I don't want to talk about it now, but just so you know that. What Dytel normally does, what they normally do and what they did here is they also provide both PowerPoints and source code. And the only reason I'm mentioning that, no, I'm not going to go over those, but the PowerPoints are right here in both zipped and unzipped, or there's unzipped and there's a zip format. And the source code for the book is right here. All right, and I don't know if I have that, if I zip that or not. Probably did. Yeah, source code. So that's there. And they both should be out on Banner. I should have everything in Banner up to date. Like I said, should. Not saying I do, I should. Now, I wanted to check on this one. I don't remember, but something tells me that they did give me smart access to this book. But they may not have. That's the older version of the book. I'll have to see. I'll have to contact the publisher and see if they've. So I've got this, and like I said, it's there, but it's a little bit older. So we can use that if we need something, I guess. All right. I don't know how many problems we're going to have or how many homeworks we're going to have. What I'm looking at right now probably is to give you 2 assignments, and one will be the project that you'll work on for most of the semester. Under the competencies, I kept it simple, and they're all Android related, Android and or Eclipse related. All right. Some of the stuff we've already talked about in here. The majority, though, we will be talking about as we go on in here. Again, like I said, I think this looks pretty much like the older book look. This is a 2013, so I think they just updated it. So at least for now, I'll be able to use it, so I've got something. Now, one thing, just so you know this, I may have said this to you before, I don't know. But in many ways, Dytel, they're kind of a book factory. And they tend to write almost all their books the same way. The only thing that changes is the programming language. So they don't typically put a lot of different stuff in their books. The only reason that I'm telling you that is just so you know, if you were to decide you wanted me to order that other one, the iOS, the Swift one, It's very similar to this book. It's got the same programs in it, etc. The other book, the one that's not out yet, the one that I had ordered, is a book on Swift by Dytel. In other words, the last two chapters in that book are the welcome program and the tip calculator. But the rest of that book is on Swift. Because I looked at that and I thought maybe that would be better, because since it's a new language, you know, unlike Android, which in some ways isn't new because you've had Java. So again, these are the programs that are in there. Now these are the ones that are in this book, and I can see if I can get a hold of a copy of this book, because they've got even more things in there. Notice there's a route tracker, a slideshow, an enhanced slideshow, and a weather viewer app. I'll see if I can get a hold of a PDF of this one. All right, but by and large, the welcome app, the tip calculator, etc., they're the same, just about, as the ones that are in our new book. So if you do, forget about what's up on the screen there. But if you look, if you do have your new book, the book with a black cover on it, I'm not going to go over chapter 1 because we did that before the end of last semester. I went through those PowerPoints, which you may or may not remember. It's an intro to Android, and it's, you know, who's using this version, how many are using that version, etc. And I think we've already hit that. The welcome app, since every single person in this class was in the advanced Java class, if you remember, I went through that welcome app. I don't think we should have to go through that one either. Now, I didn't go through the internationalization and stuff that's in there, because by and large, most of that stuff doesn't work well with the emulator. All right, and the talk back and all that other stuff, so I'm not going to go through that. If you want, we can go back and we can look at the tip calculator again, but I think, to be honest with you, as far as Android, I think people kind of had tip calculator up the wazoo, so to speak. All right, that you've had quite a bit of it. And again, remember, for all of these, so that's the first 3 chapters, but for the welcome app, the tip calculator, the Twitter searches, the flag quiz, the Canon game, the doodles, and the address book, you've got the source code for each and every one of those. They're all out there on the P drive, and that's what I showed you before. Out here under the spring, source code, Android examples, Eclipse projects, there they are. So this is chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8. So you've got all that code. I'm not in you know, how we go through this class, what I thought was, well, we'd start by, and just to get us back into the feel of things, so to speak, would be to go and take the one for the Twitter searches app, because there's some new stuff in it, and build it as a class. So the good news is, if someone is not here today, or if someone falls behind, or would rather just watch, you can do that because you've got the code. All right? Now, how many people in this room right now don't have the book? All right, so you might want to go, for now at least, and just look on, not this second, but what I wanted to mention to you is, let's see, what I wish I would have done in here, originally, just so you know, originally this was going to be the book for both classes. This was going to be the Intro to Java book too. And the reason for that is there are about 6 or 7 appendices at the end of the book that go through beginning Java. That's what I was going to do. Then I went back and reread the appendices again and said they weren't strong enough. I didn't really like them as opposed to Gaddis, so I said I'm going to stick with Gaddis. All right? Then what I should have done is, you can buy this book, but you can buy it without the appendices, and it would have been smaller and cheaper. But I forgot to do that, so I apologize for that. So, I mean, the stuff that's in here for Java is good. And it's, this book, I think, was, what is it, $39.99 or something like that? I think that the other one might have been $10 cheaper. But basically it's the same book. And it doesn't have any exercises at the end of the chapter in the other book. All right. But what I wanted to mention is at the end of, I think it's chapter 3. So at the end of chapter 3, there's some exercises on pages 95 and 96. I'll write this stuff up, I just haven't done it yet. But on pages 95 and 96, on page 95, there's 2 examples, or 2 things on the bottom of the page I'd like you to look at, and that is 3.6 and 3.8, which goes up to the top of the next page. Then on the next page, 3.11. Now I'd like you to either grab one of those as we get going in here, or something that you think is comparable, and you'll just send me an email and let me know, and I'd like you to make an app for that. Now, it can be very simple, but what I'd like to do is we have now gone through in this book here, we've gone through chapters 1, 2, and 3. All right? And you say, no, we didn't. Yes, we did. At the end of the semester, last semester, and they're still out there. The lectures are still out there. I lectured on chapter 1, the PowerPoints from this book, right near the end of your semester. Last week we had class. And I also did chapter 2 from this book. The notes that I put into your program in the code, I took from this book. And we went over the tip calculator. We spent an ungodly amount of time on that tip calculator. So the reason that I'm telling you that is in your book, at the beginning of chapter 1, and you don't have to go and turn to it or anything, but I just want to tell you, it says, chapter 1, it says the objectives were the history of Android and the Android SDK. Fine. I'm not going to say who cares, but fine. It's not going to really help you to become an Android programmer. Google Play Store for downloading apps. There's actually more in chapter 9 on the Google Play Store than there is in this book, or in this chapter rather. 3, the Android packages used in this book to help you create Android apps. Well, that's a good thing to go back to. All right. Sometimes the hardest thing in here is to just remember, well, geez, what do I need to in order to be able to do that? Sometimes you put the code in, and as I was telling the first year people yesterday, you let Eclipse find it for you. Remember, if you forget to put an import statement in, and you should, and you put the code in that references what that import statement would be, Eclipse flags it, but then in their autocorrect, it gives you the opportunity to go and sit there and add it then. All right, so if that's easier, you can do it that way. Basic object-oriented or object technology concepts. I mean, how many more times do you want to hear the words method in class? All right. Key software for Android development, including the Android SDK, the Java SDK, the Eclipse integrated development environment, and Android Studio. All right. I will tell you, I don't know if it's in here, all right, in the ones here, or if it's someplace else, but at least the claim is, if you read through this book, it's either here or it's online that Dytel claims that they have these, all the ones that are in here, these, the source and stuff, this is all right, all that stuff that you see in there, that's Eclipse stuff. But they claim that they have Android Studio solutions for all of these too. So if you want to start going down that route and learn that, my guess is that if it's a year from now, and if I'm the person, you know, that's what I'm saying all the time, I'm saying if, because I have no idea what the hell, if you hear some of the stuff that they're planning on doing, I don't like any of it, all right? But if I'm the person teaching it, it might be that in that class we use Android Studio. I don't know, all right? Then they say important Android documentation. Well, one thing that they showed, and I'm going to actually just go back to this. Again, maybe if you say, no, you didn't go through this stuff before, maybe this will help jog your memory a little bit. I don't know. I have no idea now if this system is running so slow just because it's running so slow, or if it's because I've reached whatever they consider to be the max as far as having things open. Either way, I'm not real pleased with it, but gotta live with what you got, I guess. All right, so this was the stuff that we went over this at the end of last semester, and I'm just literally, all right. Yeah, they gave you some sites, and some of the stuff is really good. Get Android source code. There are tons of examples out there. What I don't really want you to do, okay, is I don't want you to sit there and say, hey, I found this really cool game online, and the source code's out there for it. And all I want to do is make changes to it. And I don't have time to sit there and look at the changes you make. So if all you do is change the background color, I don't really know. You know, when people say, well, then you ought to check on it more, you know, in more detail. I don't have time to do that. You know, this is your chance to go out and sell yourself. As I told you, my hope is I mentioned this in the last class, in the DIP class, that you guys, in the DIP class, you'll show what you did in this class and the next class also. Whether it's the same app or a different app. All right, because this is a chance. There are companies that are thinking of getting into Android and Swift development, especially in Rock and Green County, that aren't doing diddly. So if you can show them something you've done, that might help get your foot in the door as far as getting a job. All right. Mike and I were talking this morning. Hopefully it's okay I say this, Mike. It's too late now. But he was mentioning that around here, a lot of the jobs that he's seen are asking for 4-year degrees. Whereas he said when he looked more up north, did I say that right? More up north, that a lot of them were just saying 2-year degrees. And I said, by the time you graduate from here, I'd apply for everything. Now, if they say doctors, you know, a PhD required, no, you're probably not even going to get an interview. But I've had students who've applied for jobs that ask for a master's, and they've gotten an interview. Not saying they've gotten the job, but they've gotten an interview. And I've had several students where the job description, the job listing has said bachelor's or above need only apply, and they applied and got the job. In fact, I've had a couple of employers talk to me and say, why is it that they have them for 4 years and you're teaching them more in 2 years than they are in 4? I said, because they teach them a lot of fluff. And they do. It depends on the school. I mean, a lot of schools are excellent, and they do a hell of a lot better job than we do because they've got you for 4 years. But I told you that a few years ago I had students when I was teaching up in Wisconsin Rapids. I had 2 guys in my C class, and we went around the table. We were told at that time everybody had to introduce themselves. We did that yesterday. I had everybody, all the first-year students, say their names. They hated it. Andrew looked at me like, why the hell do I have to go first? He's like, Andrew Gallagher, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be saying. I'm trying to tell him that's all you have to say. But these 2 guys who were in the class, they told me that they had taken Intro to C at UW-Stevens Point. They did 2 programs. And the first one was literally Hello World. That was their first program out of 2. I said, well, how was the second one? We kind of did it as a class, and it used a structure, and most of us got it to work, but really none of us knew what the hell we were doing. Well, that's a great class. He said, how many programs are you going to give? And at that time, it was a lot more than you guys get. I said 17. They were like, all right. The rest of the guys were looking at me like, I want to kill this guy. 17 programs? But they loved it. All right. So I just, you know, if you see something that you're interested in, start applying. All right. Also, what the hell, because I'm interrupting myself anyway. But I've shown you this thing before, but I do want to show it to you again. This Comply 365, I believe, is a Beloit-based company. One of the graduates from this program, she graduated now going on 10 years ago, Kristen Ward, she works there. She sent me an email during the break that are we interested in possibly having some people apply for paid internships that could lead to full-time employment. Well, yeah, of course. She got back and said good, and then she sent it to her boss, who of course never got back to me after that, or at least so far hasn't got back to me. But the point is, these are the kind of places, you know, throw them a resume. I'm not saying you'll get interviewed. I'm not saying it'll be anything, but if nothing else, you're putting that bug into their ear. Whereas if you send it in, and then they have an opening and you send another resume, oh, Zach, yeah, didn't he send us a resume before? Type of thing. You never know. Under the contact, I was looking. There you go. So it is Beloit. I'm not sure where that is. You all know Beloit a hell of a lot better than I do. Is that 3rd Street Suite? Is that downtown? He doesn't know when he lives there. Okay. All right. The other stuff, again, they went through the history in here. We talked about it. The stuff that's in here, face detection and stuff, and they start talking about swipes and everything else. It's the kind of thing that until you're working with it on a day-to-day basis, right now, I believe at least, all of you at least at one time or another, probably even the lab assistants, you go through a little bit of brain drain, at least every once in a while. You're like, wait a minute, I know how to do that in that language. And you're trying to switch over in your head, and it's almost too much. I go through it myself, etc. but the chances of you getting a job where your job is going to be to write Java, do Android, do iOS, do PHP, is about none. Unless you work for a company that has all those different apps that they support and you're hired in as the sole programmer. And if that happens, you ought to ask for a hell of a lot of money. All right, if that's the case. Yes. Not that I've heard. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've heard of a couple other breakout languages, but they haven't gone anywhere yet. The thing that's cool about Swift, and I don't want to get too off on too much of a Swift tangent, but I didn't know this until I'd gotten into it. It was actually conceived in 2010, but the group of people who worked on it, they were literally not only sworn to secrecy, evidently they had to sign things, and if they left, that they couldn't talk about it, because when they announced it at the WWDC in June of 2014, people who worked for Apple were amazed. They didn't even know this was in development. And here they were showing this language. All right, they talked about some of the popular apps. This is where it got a little bit better. All right, again, I'm not saying that when you're working that you have to have this up, but notice some of these, as it says, start with Android. So this is stuff that's specific to Android. All right, if you were going to do something that was just some Java utility, you'd be importing java.util.star as opposed to this stuff. And usually what Dytel seems to do is he imports his Java stuff first, then his Android stuff underneath it. All right, I don't, the way that you do it is totally up to you. I like when I write my own code, I like to put stuff in alphabetic order. It just makes it easy when I'm looking to see whether or not I've done something. All right. So this is what I mentioned before, the touch, the double touch. The next app that I'd like us to start working on, and that is this Twitter Searches app. You literally have to do a long press on it. And if you don't know what that is, there'll be a button on there, you press the button and you hold down. When you've held down long enough, the screen's going to change. And it'll give you the opportunity to do an insert, an update, or a delete. All right, so most of this stuff is pretty much goes whether you're talking Windows development, Android development, iOS development. The actual commands and stuff may differ, but what's going on with touch, double touch, etc. is pretty much the same. And you already know this, that it's going to also be different whether you're doing it on an actual device or whether you're doing it on an emulator or a simulator. It's going to be different. I mean, here, when we want to do a drag down, you don't do that with your mouse. You don't do that on your screen on the emulator. You hold down on the left mouse button and you drag it down. All right, so it just depends on what it is you're working with. All right. And I think I told you this right before the break, that I had literally put in for 12, I think it was, 12 or 13 tablets. And I got an email back from Kristen Hesselbacher, who's our grant manager, saying, what a great idea. And never another word. So I don't know where it stands. If I would have known we were going to go through this debacle we've gone through with the Macs, I would have asked for 6 more of those. All right? From what I understand, it's too late now for me to ask. I can ask next year. The way it sounds. I know that won't help any of you. All right, but that's what I've heard. All right. Here's some another pretty good slide. Android hardware controls on the emulator. All right. I think John has provided for people who wanted it. You've got like an emulator cheat sheet or something like that. Okay. All right. I don't think we have to talk about the welcome page again. I don't know if you want to say anything other than at the end of the year, at the end of the semester, I came in and John came in one day and we talked with Terry. All right, and John, this was right the week before Christmas, I think it was, and John said he wasn't going to be anywhere, wasn't going out for too far at least, and I was, so I said it would be a little bit inconvenient. So John did the yeoman's work on here, and he worked with Terry. They set something up, and I think Adrian might have been involved too. And from what I understand, pretty much, because I haven't done very much work on this over the break, it's going to look the same. It's going to operate the same. One thing that we found out is the machines that I asked for those tablets, if we get those and they come in, we might have to change some stuff. because some of the settings and the type of machine that I suggested that we buy are not totally, they're a little bit different than the specs that you see on your emulator now. We'll worry about that if that happens. You know, knowing the way that Lux seems to work in this place, they'll come in on May 15th. All right, you know, when the class ends the 14th. I mean, that's just the luck of the draw. If it works that way, it works that way. I'm still waiting. They owe me $900 from money of my own that I put out. All right, and I keep getting emails back. Now it's been pushed to the beginning of February. All right, when it was going to be mid-December, then the beginning of January, then mid-January. Now it's the beginning of February. All right, my wife's mad. She's like, "Why do you have all these charges on here?" Right? That's what happens when you let your wife do your financial work. All right. Do we get this? Are we going to get the lock like we used to get the lock? All right, because we talked a little bit about this before, that if yours does look like this, what'll happen is if you hold down on the left mouse button and you drag up to the corner, it'll typically turn like an orangish or some other color, and that'll actually start your app working. All right. I mean, it's already running, but that'll get it going, whatever. If you've got questions, I mean, I can tell you how to switch your workspace, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I know I heard that Travis mentioned that before, and do some of the other stuff, but I'm not going to lie. You know, I asked John. He was telling me this morning, and he told me yesterday how to do something. So ask or look it up. This morning, I couldn't for the life of me remember how to change the default directory in, I was talking about that yesterday in Visual Studio. It's real simple. Probably why I can't remember it. The easier it is, the harder it is for me to remember. All right, and I got that, and I put that out there for changing that and the font size and the font color. If you come across a URL or a site that you think is really good and you want to send it to me, please do. Then I'll try to compile a list of good URLs, and I'll put them out there for everybody. All right. You know, one of the highlights of projects, stuff being open source, is people share. When people share, it is for the greater good. At least that's my opinion. All right, so there's the import stuff. They want you to launch their Doodles app in Chapter 1. Their Doodles app, even though you might not think so, you could build this right now. Because look, we've got 4 what in there? Well, it's pretty obvious what we have, right? You've got 4 different sliders. That's your alpha, which is going to go between 0 and 1, totally opaque to totally transparent. Your amount of red, your amount of green, your amount of blue. There's just some kind of a text field, basically, that's going to hold whatever you've combined up here. All right, and it says a set color button, but that's all stuff that we've done stuff like that before. So in this Doodles app, you can play with your colors, you can play with your line thickness, and they have you literally come in there and draw a flower, and then draw the stem and some grass, and notice how they've changed the color between the stem and the grass, and then they have you do some rain, etc. So you could do all that stuff. The advantage of doing something like that, all right, something like that is, again, people see that, they see that it's got, it's got colors on it and stuff, and people like shiny things. Isn't that the truth? You can sit there and write a really good app, and if it's not well marketed and it's not pretty, all right, you may or may not have heard about this. I'm taping anyway, what the hell. Come next year, the Blackhawk is getting rid of their marketing program. It's going to be the last year. There's at least two programs that are going to be suspended, and that's one of them. All right. And I was talking, Stefan is in that marketing program now, and it'll run through next year, so he'll be able to graduate from it. We were talking about it, and he said, yeah, Miss Cindy, because Cindy Leverance is the main instructor there, she doesn't like the way that the program's being marketed. When he said that, I was kind of going like this, because I'm thinking, okay, you're a marketing program. If you don't like the way something is being marketed, shouldn't you try to take some control? But the problem is you can't here. She's limited in her sphere of influence as far as what she can do. All right. But you, if you're creating, the first thing I tell you is, let's pretend for a second here that Teresa says she's going to create an app. All right. She's going to create her own app, and not to make fun of her, but what was it last year? You like turtles, right? But it's something on the care of turtles, and she's got a really cool idea, which could very well happen, right? The first thing I'd say is, before you do any of that, go out to the App Store, or at least Google it, and see how many that are out there are like that. If the goal is for you to create an app and try to make some money on it. The last time I looked, there were like a friend of mine who teaches this stuff at Madison. Actually, he just retired a year ago. But the guy who was teaching Android out there, he created a simple grocery store app where you could sit there and put your stuff in there, and then as you got it, you could cross it off, etc. He said when he put his in there, he made it for free. He wanted to see how many people would download it. But he did it for free. He said there were already over 300 grocery store apps out there at the time he submitted his. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. There could be 1,000 of them out there right now. All right. So that's the final picture when you get done with it. Okay, that's what it looks like as it says running on the Nexus ABD. Now, the only thing I wanted to mention in here, because I did actually highlight some of these, this is my opinion. You may not agree a bit with what I'm about to say, which is fine. All right. But this is at the end of the chapter here. I'm looking. And it's on pages 31 and 32, characteristics of great apps. And the only reason I'm telling you this is these are some of the ones that I thought were most important. One I already mentioned, provide audio and visual feedback. All right, have high quality animations. I can't believe the number of instructors here who still go out to Word and use clip art. If you've ever seen those little men and women that they have on there, they look like stick people. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, your students are creating stuff that looks better than that. All right. Well, I'm not a computer person. Well, it's real hard to go out to Google Images and grab stuff, isn't it? Evidently. All right. Some useful utilities that are out here. Provide useful functionality and accurate information. Something that people can use, and that's correct. All right. Make the user better informed. Give them something they didn't previously have, or show it to them in a way that's different in the way they had been looking at it. General characteristics, the only one that I said here, are novel and creative. If I was going to do a grocery store app, but I wanted it to be a little bit different, for instance, you know, maybe I would set it up so I literally went out there and this was going to be a grocery store app, but it was going to be one I was going to charge for. The ones that I've looked at, the majority of them, they're just textual based. So if I decided I wanted to do a grocery store app, and if you put in carrots, boom, it would say carrots. Oh, it would go into the database and it would find a picture of carrots. All right, that might, you know, anyways, well, that's stupid. I'm just giving you an example of what most people don't do. When it says be novel, show something to people in a way they haven't seen it before. That's all, whatever that happens to be. Use quality graphics, animations, audio, and video. All right? And finally, the last thing I'd say in here is just the last one. Are intuitive and easy to use. And most people say, well, yeah, if a kid can use it. No, that's not the measuring stick. If a person my age can use it, who's not a real computer literate person, then it's intuitive and easy to use. Little kids can usually figure out anything because they just don't give up. All right? On my Facebook thing, I hardly ever post anything. I just sometimes read other people's. I hardly ever even go out there. But somebody sent me something about what happens when you're over 50. You know, and one of the things was your neighbors never accuse you of being too loud when you have a party because no one can tell. And it was all stuff like that. And my wife read them yesterday, and she said, "Oh my God, just about every one of these are true," and they are. But one thing is when you're older, you know, in some ways you're less patient. You look at something, if you can't figure it out fast enough, it's the hell with it. It's not worth it. Okay. All right, there's more stuff in here. I don't know if there's anything else that's in here that's worth talking about. Again, key online documentation. Notice virtually everything. Developer.android.com. That's your starting point. We've talked about that before. There's other sites that you can go to also. All right, there's, as it says, discussion groups. Boy, if you haven't registered with Stack Overflow, you really should register with Stack Overflow. All right. Again, there's all sorts of different user groups and other stuff, forums, etc. that are out there. All right. Some of this stuff, there are Android YouTube channels. Dytel has a YouTube channel. I have not subscribed to it. I haven't really looked at it. I get some of the Dytel tapes. All right, the school has bought some for me. All right, that's even another thing we could do because I have some of their Android stuff. and I've got some of their Swift stuff. But the point is, the reason I didn't exactly want to show those in class, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. So now you're the same guy who complained when somebody was using your tapes, but now in your class you're showing somebody else's tapes. So how are you any better than them? I mean, I would think that would actually be true. All right, so that was it for Chapter 1. In Chapter 2, if you remember that, because this is the review. All right, in Chapter 2 you built that, if you remember that. I showed that to you. That's again out there. The thing to realize is there are 3 components to this particular program. All right, the first thing they do is they have you take the Hello World, change it to Welcome, Android App Development, change the size, and change the color. All right. Second thing they have you do is drag in an image here. All right, and that's an image. These are both images. This is of the Android mascot, and that's the Dytel mascot, which is the thumbs up bug. All right. That was what this. I mean, so there's absolutely no programming in this app here for Chapter 2. It's drag and drop, and then going in and making some changes in the properties window so stuff lines up and looks pretty, etc. And so they walk you through starting the project, you know, etc. They talk about what the stuff in here means. The funny thing is, that screen that I've kind of went by you, they do the same thing. They go, just accept everything. Okay, it's all stuff you'll use later. Okay. All right. One thing that we will talk about as we go on in here, and I think we mentioned this a little bit, is again, if you look in here, you've got HDPI, XHDPI, XXHDPI, and like XXX HDPI. And you'll notice that with each one, they get bigger. Those are the icons that you're going to have when you save something and you're looking at it in your emulator or on your phone. That makes sense to everybody? All right. The bigger typically the bigger the device, the more X's you're going to have in your DPI type of thing. Now, one thing that it does, just so you know, is it tries to scale. So in other words, if you can have only one of these, so if somebody says, well, the only one you can have is any one you want, but just one, take the biggest one. Because they typically scale down pretty well. You understand what I'm saying? So if you had this one, which is like XXX HDPI, and you put it in there, it would still look pretty good. They don't scale up very well. So if you try taking this MDPI right here, the medium one, you tried to put it into an XX, it probably would look very grainy. If you've ever done that with any image software where you try to take something and make it look bigger, you probably have noticed the same kind of thing. Now, typically, and they talk a little bit about this in the book, and maybe I have before too, that if it's important enough for you, so if I created this app and I spent a boatload of time on it, I might even consider getting a graphic artist, or if I have the ability, going in there and creating my own icon. All right, doing it like that. A lot of people do that. And there are places out there, some of which will either do them for free or for pretty cheap. As always, if you get something done for free, sometimes it's worth everything you're paying for it. So, all right, remember this? Create activity. We had the blank activity. Here it explains what each one of these things are. Those are our 3 choices: blank activity, full screen activity, and master detail flow. And I'll leave that up there for just a second so you can take a look at it. Again, this is taken right from your textbook. And it's the chart that's on the bottom of page 45 in your book. Always love that when you guys don't do it, but when the first year people will say this, do we have to memorize this? I've just started to answer yes to anything anybody asks. Yes. Oh yeah, you really should. Really? Oh. Okay. So you know this already. What they have you do, if you follow the directions in Chapter 2 for the Welcome app, you will actually have brought in the icon that you see right there. All right. And then they have you come in for the Welcome and remove the Hello World. They explain here, this is some good stuff. Notice this is figure 2.9, which again is in your book on page, takes up most of page 47. But they explain what all these components are down on the bottom of your screen. I was telling the first year people yesterday in the Java class, we brought up Eclipse, and we built basically 3 different employee apps. We built the same one, then copied it over and made changes to it twice. But all the stuff that we see in Eclipse that's over here, where you've got your outline view and all the other stuff in the properties window, I just told them, when we're writing just code, there's very little in there that you're ever going to use. All right. So some of the stuff that's down here, again, problems, Java doc, declaration console, logcat. I know John, talking to him at least, correct me if I'm wrong, uses logcat a lot more than I do. I use the console window so it prints output, but logcat basically logs everything, and you can set filters in it to have it only show certain things. There's a lot of different things that you can do with the logcat console. All right. The Explorer window, I think we've kind of talked about this. All right, again, in the, underneath assets, for example, that's where some of your images, etc., are going to go under the library, the stuff that's under there, the res stuff. We've gone through and we've looked at a lot of this. All right, the author talks about a lot of the different stuff that's in here, and again, goes over it. You can see this again in the book. This is on the top of page 49 in the book. All right. Here's the LDPI through XXX HDPI stuff. You'll notice again the number of dots per inch as it keeps expanding. All right. Anybody seen? Because I've actually seen things where they're literally, they call them phablets now, if you haven't heard that, which is kind of a combination of a phone and a tablet. And with some of them, I saw this thing online. I wish I would have remembered to bookmark it or something. But they had a guy, he had a thing, it was smaller than a tablet but bigger than a phone. And it was a geeky guy, and he was trying to put it in his pocket. Of course, it wouldn't fit. He kept trying to do this, and he eventually ripped his pocket. It was just kind of funny, but it was about this big. And it keeps getting bigger, because no matter how big you make a phone, it's not big enough. And I watch these people, I just need a bigger tablet. It's like, my God, then why don't you get just a laptop? Because there's really not much difference. All right? But I tell that to my wife. She loves her iPad. I think she just lives for that damn thing. All right. The hierarchical view, we looked at this before. We've gone through there. You remember this. This is in your outline in your upper right-hand corner. We can right mouse click, for example, on here and change this from a relative layout to something else if we want to. Remember, when we go through this, and when we right mouse click on anything that's in there, we can edit its ID, which is its name and code. All right, and when we put that in there, we can put it in there directly, and it'll always be put in, and it'll look weird because it'll have the ampersand, etc. in it. All right. All right. The strings, we're going to do some more of that in this chapter. Properties window, hopefully, I don't like the properties window as much in here as I do in Visual Studio, and again, I think it's a matter of just the fact that I'm more used to using the one in Visual Studio. That's all. I don't think it's really any better or worse. What I don't like is sometimes they'll have the same thing, so they might have text under layout parameter, and they might have text or something else under something else. All right, that I don't like, but that's just me. We talked about this, the DP versus the SP. The density independent pixel versus the scale independent pixel, but you can still work with pixels. You can still work with inches, millimeters, etc., points if you want to. All right, colors. All right, as it shows right here, if you do put in Android : color /, that's what it's supposed to show you. You still can go in and use RGB, etc., for colors, and you can create your own customized colors too. Gravity, this is one that most people don't like, and if you don't like it, when we start doing auto layout in Swift, you'll like this even less. All right. So there they had you remove the hello world and change it to welcome to Android app development. Then they had you go in under the properties window and change the color, and then they had you go in and change the font size. All right, and stretch it out so it basically took up the whole thing in there. All right. Just like you get in Swift, you do get the guidelines that are in here. All right. Then they had you go in again and add that and add that. That was the whole thing. There was nothing more to this. So that was it for Chapter 2. So let's take a couple minutes to go over Chapter 3, which has got less slides, and we'll just take a couple minutes, and then we'll take a break. So again, this was your review. So in Chapter 3, this is the one, again, we spent the most time on. This is the tip calculator. Notice what it says. Design a GUI using a linear layout. Use the outline window to add components. Use text views, edit text, and seek bars. All right. Use object-oriented capabilities. Work with classes, objects, etc. Programmatically interact with GUI components. So we wanted to make sure that as you drag that slider to the left or to the right, that the amount of the tip that you're going to be giving, because that's the percentage, will either go up or down, depending on whether you told that percentage to go up or down. Use event handling for both the seek bar that I just mentioned and the edit text. All right, specify whether the keypad should be showing or should not be showing, and having something that supports only portrait orientation. All right, one thing about that, just so you know, that with the portrait orientation, that's at the end of the chapter here, but that's in that Android manifest file. So that's one of the files that gets created for you automatically. That file is very similar to in Swift when you bring it up and you've got your opening file that comes up. It's not the same thing, but many of the things that are in there are the same. All right. So this was that example. All right. You may or may not remember it. That's the one that we did as a class last semester. Okay. So they talked about some of the properties that you use the most often. They had you build this. Remember, I guess it's coming up there. Those were the names that we used. Again, I do expect by now you're all big enough, boys and girls, that you can start coming up with some kind of a standard as far as how you name things. All right. I know that in some of the Swift stuff, there are no Swift naming conventions yet. So like he'll have a label and he'll call it result label. Then he'll have a text field and he'll call it number. You know what I'm saying? So there's no standard there. It's not like number text field or text field number or whatever. Just call it whatever he wants to call it. Mark, look at that. He's got the tip calculator on his phone. All right. All right. So we remember about the first day or so we got about this far where we built everything and we had medium text, etc. Then we went over and started going into our strings.xml file, and again, you use that strings.xml file for internationalization reasons. All right, you shouldn't be hard coding strings in really ever. So we had that, and that's before we put any code in. So as it says, that's your final GUI design. Then we started to put in the code. Again, somewhere between the time I copied the Dytel code and putting all my comments in, the code stopped working. So he put in some comments, as you can see here, but I put in a lot more comments than he did. All right, and the reason that I did that was because last year at that time, you didn't have this book. All right, in fact, I had just gotten this one. I was working off the older copy, the white one that I just showed you a second ago. I didn't get this till, I don't know, near the end of the semester. Hopefully the stuff that's in here, as far as the types like text view, etc., that's nothing, you know, that doesn't mean that much to you anymore. All right. Some of this stuff we've looked at, we've talked about. Again, like the Ullman stuff that I mentioned to you last hour, Dytel does a good job of telling you what he's going to tell you, showing you the code, and then telling you what he told you. He spends a lot of time going through that. But much of the stuff that's in here, other than the R file stuff, you know, setting stuff up, etc., it's all code that really isn't that difficult. It's all code that we've looked at before in one form or another. You could make the case that would say, if you could just strip out basically all the Android GUI stuff in here, that this is probably an easier program than like the Java program that we did for the employee classes. That's it. All right, I got 153. Let's come back at about 10 after 2, please, and we're going to jump into Chapter 4. And I'm not going to show you any more PowerPoint.